Hello and welcome to Independence Avenue Media. I'm Iya Meor-Mishuli, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Secretary Mark Esper. Before we get to the interview, though, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media so you never miss thoughtful analysis like you're about to see on this channel. And with that, Secretary Esper, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Iya. It's good to be here with you and your audience.
Thank you. Let's start from the NATO Ankara summit, which concluded last week. Going into the summit, there was some nervousness that it may not have gone quite as well as it did, but summit ended on a pretty strong note. At least that's the assessment that we hear from the experts. What's your assessment? What's your take from the summit last week?
Yeah, look, I think you took the words out of my mouth. I think there was a lot of nervousness going into it about what President Trump may say or do with regard to NATO in general or specific issues. But as you noted, it came out positive. I mean, he had some warm comments at the end with regard to the alliance. He met with President Zelensky of Ukraine and had some positive things to say about that, and made news with regard to announcing that they would get licenses to build Patriot missiles. So, I think overall, there was a low goalpost going into the meeting, into the summit, just hoping to survive it with no major ruptures. And I think that bar was easily met. And so the question will be, what is next from here?
What do you think? What is next from here? There is some uneasiness from the European allies not looking at the U.S. as a reliable partner. Do you think the summit kind of addressed that?
Well, many allies still feel that way, and they will. I don't believe that. I think the United States does remain a reliable partner. I take issue with that phrase. Look, I know for the Europeans it means that will the United States be there if Article 5 is instituted? But look, I throw that back at them, at some of them at least, and say this much. Yes, I mean, they're questioning, does the United States have the interest in defending NATO and the capability? And the answer is yes on the capability, and they question the interest. And I would turn that inside out to say to many allies in Europe and Canada, do you have the interest? Yes. But do you have the capability? No. And so that is the questionnaire I think that the United States might say. And pro-NATO people such as myself, I served in NATO, I lived in Europe, would say, look, I doubt reliability if you can't produce the capabilities that we need to defend ourselves, to defend the continent against Russia. So, look, I think it's a two-way street. Alliance means collective action to address a collective problem. And what we need to see is countries living up to their obligations. We know that many have committed to the 5%. Some have pushed it off to the 2030s. I don't think that's good enough. And a couple have at least refused not even to go to as high as 5%. So I think that is still out there that needs to be addressed. And I'm pleased to see many countries are accelerating their investments. They're talking about conscription, or if not, just expanding their force through voluntary enlistments. And we do see a lot of defense investment happening out there. So those are all positive signs.
I recently spoke with General Cavoli, who described the threat and the scale of the war and how maybe we're not fully understanding the threat coming from Russia, especially from the European side. Where do you see the threat coming from Russia? And let me just add a bit to that question. As General Cavoli said, that despite tremendous losses that Russia has experienced, like Russia lost 4,000 tanks, for example, where some allies only have 150 or 200 in their arsenal. In addition to some damage to their Black Sea fleet and the ground forces, Russian Air Force is largely intact, Russian nuclear forces are largely intact, and he expressed concern that maybe we're not paying as much attention to it as we should. How do you see threat from Russia to Europe at this point?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there are many ways to look at it. I think, picking up with where you left off, I think if you look at their military, you're right, their strategic forces are intact, although they lost some strategic bombers due to clever drone strikes by the Ukrainians. Their Air Force, I think, is largely intact, although it's proven to be untested once again up against Ukrainian air defenses. So that tells you something about their readiness. The Navy has suffered severely, at least the Black Sea Fleet. But I'd say importantly, the two things that where Russia has taken a beating is with regard to their special forces, which have been pretty much decimated, and of course their conventional military. Maybe not so much with regard to hardware, as you said. They entered the conflict with thousands of tanks. They lost thousands of tanks. So there are reports that much of the armor force and artillery have been rebuilt. We'll see. I don't know. But in terms of the quality of their soldiers, they still don't seem to be able to produce combat forces that can conduct maneuver warfare, that can fight the fight that we'd want to see in modern times and would be outmatched against NATO forces. So that's just on that front. I think the bigger question is, capability aside, is what's the willingness of Putin to engage in another front? And look, there's a lot of debate about that. We know some European defense ministers have said he's 2 years away, or maybe by 2030 may try to make a move somewhere. We know that hybrid warfare has been ongoing in various parts of Europe. So I guess the question is, I wouldn't take them for granted. Putin today is in a tough place. He's certainly not winning the war, and some like myself would say he's losing ground, if not starting to lose the war, and is suffering tremendous losses over 1.2, 1.3 million Russians killed or wounded on the battlefield, and it's starting to hit home now with regard to Ukrainian strikes against oil refineries, things like that are finally affecting the Russian people more directly than the losses. So I think he's facing some tough choices here. The question is, will he double down and try and invade somewhere else? I don't know. It seems a little hard for me to believe, but I wouldn't discount it, which argues for NATO to continue to build its capabilities, its defenses, particularly in the frontline states, whether that's Finland, the Baltics for sure, and then the other Eastern Front states.
You mentioned Ukrainian sort of upper hand at this point, or how Russia is on the back foot at this point in the war. Do you think that the West is doing enough to sustain Ukraine's advancement and to sustain this pressure on Russia to, at the end, to see the end of this war, as you refer to it?
The answer is probably not. I think some Europeans would say the same. Certainly President Zelensky would. We know that the immediate needs of Ukraine include air defense interceptors, particularly Patriot missiles, because the Russian ballistic missiles are getting through. But there are obviously other things they need, other types of support that they would rely on. And that's not just military support, economic support, diplomatic support, and other ways to put more pressure on Russia. Of course, on the table, it didn't come up this time, but last year and remains out there, is what's the path forward for Ukrainian access to NATO, NATO membership, and that would be send another strong message. I think the question is getting further along to I think what you're asking is, how do we enable Ukraine, President Zelensky, to build enough leverage to force Putin to the table to drive some type of an agreement that would at least halt the fighting and change the dynamic. And right now we haven't found that leverage, although maybe the Ukrainians have with their attacks on Russian infrastructure, on oil refineries, etc., deep into the heartland through their use of drones and long-range cruise missiles. Maybe that's it. We'll see. Time will tell. But I think the more we can help them on the hardware front, on the political front, I think all that helps us drive to some type of a place where Putin is forced to come to the table.
You've publicly stated that you support Ukraine's NATO membership. Why is that? And if you would just maybe also touch upon the Ukrainian armed forces at this point, because you've also spoken publicly about that, how they are just innovating better, how they might be the best military force in Europe at this moment. So if you would combine those two aspects, Ukraine's NATO membership and the capabilities of their military now, why do you think that?
Well, look, I go back to first principles with regard to NATO membership, and it was always, it was the Western democracies who banded together in this collective defense mission to oppose the Soviet Union initially. And now, of course, it's a Russian and a revanchist Russia under Putin. So I think, again, if a country wants to join NATO, if it can meet its membership criteria, then I think we should keep the door open. So I think, to me, there should not be a debate about the door being open for Ukraine or anybody else. The debate has to be over are they meeting the criteria? And then what's the best way to bring them in? Because there's clearly legitimate concern about inviting into NATO a country that's in an active conflict with Russia, the adversary here. And so what are the different formulations that you might do that, right? Is it kind of like we've discussed where during the Cold War, West Germany was in, but East Germany was out? So do the occupied parts of Ukraine don't get access, but the unoccupied, the free parts do? So I think there are some formulas by which we can think about that. Or maybe we can get them on the path, not to full membership, but some type of partial membership or full membership with caveats. I think there are ways to find this out, but sending the message, I think, is important to reassuring our other NATO allies, to bolstering the Ukrainians, to pushing back and deterring the Russians further. So there are a number of things we can do that. Now, to get on that path. Now, with regard to your question about the Ukrainian military, clearly it's the most capable and experienced fighting force on the continent right now. They've taken on an army many times its size with a country has 10 times the economy, 4 times the population, and they've beaten them back, certainly held them to a stalemate. So if the question is, does or would Ukraine provide a positive security benefit when it comes to their military capabilities, the answer is a clear yes, because not just have they fielded conventional capabilities, but they've innovated for everybody, and to include the United States, when it comes to drone warfare, counter-drone warfare, tactics, doctrine, you name it. And I think there's a lot we can learn from them. And it's not just, aerial drones, it's ground drones, it's sea drones that have destroyed or damaged or certainly pushed back dozens of Russian ships in the Black Sea. So I think there's a lot NATO can gain and learn from them, and I think we should continue to have this discussion to figure out what is the right path forward, over what timeline.
At the start of the conversation, you mentioned the license that President Trump agreed to give to Ukraine to produce Patriot missiles in Ukraine. Would you explain the process? What does that mean? It sounds like big news, and it, of course, is huge. But at the same time, the mechanics of it are not as clear. So can you explain what that means and how Ukraine could benefit from it?
Yeah, look, I think it's more of a signal of support than it is an immediate material benefit, because the fact that the United States would grant a license is just one step in a long process that begins all the way back to the company that produces them. But certainly in this case it would be Lockheed Martin, and that should jumpstart a process by which technical discussions begin with regard to what that would look like. I mean, you have everything from supply chains to licensing to protecting intellectual property, to training, to how to set up a factory or production line, to training employees to do it. I mean, it's a long process, and we have similar agreements with countries like Germany, which have been, I think, in place for a couple of years now, and they have yet to produce a single missile because it's a long, tedious process. It's very sophisticated. So that's why I say the announcement is more of a signal of support, which is good. But in terms of it producing a missile out of Ukraine anytime soon, I think we're years away from that happening. And to me, that's the immediate challenge facing Ukraine.
Some experts have said that it could take a few months, given that Ukraine already, well, first of all, has the war economy, and secondly, they already have the Flamingo production capabilities, for example. You think that's not relevant?
I think it's relevant, but I don't think it's applicable. They're very different missiles, very different production lines. And of course, you wouldn't want to turn off the Flamingo production line to jumpstart the Patriot one. So there's, again, a lot has to happen. I think a few months, I wish that were the case. But I doubt that's going to happen that quickly.
Yeah, and on the final Ukraine-related note, two days ago we heard unfortunate news that Senator Lindsey Graham passed away unexpectedly, and his last public statement was in Kyiv, where he announced that the senators had made an agreement with the White House to push through the sanctions bill that Senator Graham has championed for a couple of years now. What do you think the future of that bill is? Do you anticipate, or what's your view on that? Will it be passed? Basically, that's the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And of course, I begin with remembering Lindsey Graham. I've known him for 20 plus years during my time in the Senate. And of course, when I served in office, he was very supportive. And you know, he was very closely aligned to John McCain, who with whom I was as well, and clearly was the Republican leader on Capitol Hill in Congress in Washington, D.C. when it came to these policies, more of a Reagan type approach to foreign policy where America led and supported democracies. And he was a very strong voice there. And importantly, not just a strong voice, but had the ear of the president and can persuade him. So that is gone right now. And the question will be is who can fill that role? Who knows the conflict well enough? Who embraces those same type of Reagan-esque tenets that they kind of drove him? And who will pick up the ball. So I think that question is out there. Some members of Congress have already said they want to introduce the bill and move it in honor of him. I think the president signaled a willingness as much, and the timing is very unfortunate. But on the other hand, the fact that his untimely death and this pending bill occurred just in the wake of a positive NATO summit. Where President Trump walked away with a better feeling, not just toward NATO, but certainly said the right words with regard to Zelensky, I think gives it some light. So I think there's some optimism there right now. We'll see how this plays out over the coming days. It needs to happen soon because there aren't that many legislative days left for Congress, just a couple dozen or so. And the Senate has a crowded agenda. So I think it needs to happen here. I would aim for before the August recess, which is only a couple weeks away. We'll see what happens. I hope it does. But it's going to take some push and some support from outsiders. Hopefully the Europeans will weigh in. Others in Congress will weigh in with the White House and get this moving.
Secretary Esper, thank you so much for your time. If there is anything that you would like to add to this interview, please share your thoughts. If not, I do appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. I want to thank you and again your audience again for your focus on these issues. This is very important. As I said earlier in the day, I've been pro-NATO my whole life. I served in NATO as a young Army officer. When I worked on Capitol Hill, was a big supporter of NATO, worked with members who were, and of course when I was in office. But by the same time, I'm such a big believer in NATO. Its health is not just depends on American leadership, but it depends on all the other allies now contributing their fair share, kind of living up to those expectations. And I see the importance of the role of NATO, first and foremost, obviously focused on the continent of Europe against Russia. But I have bigger ambitions. The bigger threat I see out there in the world once we deal with Russia is going to be China. And it's going to take the Western democracies once again to be aligned, to be united, to be capable enough to push off one of the greatest threats of this century against the Western democracies. It used to be the USSR. It's now Russia. But China is out there lurking, and I think we need to be flexible enough and capable enough to make that pivot when that happens. So I'm a big believer in NATO. I want to continue to see it thrive, and I hope everybody else will take such a positive and committed approach toward the alliance.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It seems like we're on that trajectory at the moment, so we'll see how it continues. Secretary Esper, thank you very much for your time again. I do appreciate this.
Thanks, Zia. Thank you very much.
You just watched an interview with Secretary Mark Esper, who served as the U.S. Secretary of Defense during President Trump's first term in office. If you like our interviews, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media wherever you are on social media so you never miss exclusive interviews and thoughtful analysis from Independence Avenue Media. Thanks for watching and see you next time.